The hotel stood near the bus station, the kind that never tried to be more than it was. Beige facade, quiet reception desk, a constant smell of cleaning products. He chose it for convenience. 2 nights, a quick job, nothing else. The room was small and tidy, with a window facing a poorly lit parking lot. At night, the movement faded until only the distant sound of buses arriving and leaving remained. Everything felt normal at first. The hallway carpet was worn. The yellow light stayed on day and night. The room next door, 312, had an occupied sign hanging from the doorknob when he arrived. Nothing unusual. In places like that, rooms were almost always taken. He showered, ate something simple, and went to bed early. Before falling asleep, he heard footsteps in the hallway. One door opening, another closing. He assumed the guest from 312 had arrived late. He turned to his side and slept without giving it a second thought. The next morning, he woke early to the muffled sound of something being dragged in the room next door. It wasn't loud but persistent. A short, repeated noise, like light furniture being moved around. He checked the clock, 6:12 a.m. He assumed someone was getting ready to leave before breakfast. Later, in the hallway, he noticed the occupied sign still hanging on room 312's doorknob. The housekeeper pushed her cart slowly, stopping at certain doors. When she reached his room, she knocked twice, came in, changed the towels. Without thinking much, he mentioned that the room next door seemed to have someone awake very early. She simply nodded, avoiding eye contact, and moved on without touching 312. When he returned from work that afternoon, the hallway was empty, the same thick silence. The carpet always seemed slightly damp, as if it had been cleaned recently, though there was no smell of detergent. Passing by 312, he heard what sounded like a television turned on volume very low, voices almost indistinguishable. He stopped for a moment, trying to make out words, but the sound abruptly stopped. That night, already in bed, he noticed something odd. Every time he shifted in his bed, there was a brief delay and then a similar noise from the other side of the wall. Not an exact imitation, just the sound of someone moving too, as if the room next door was paying attention. He tried to ignore it. Hotels have thin walls. People have different routines. Still, it took him longer than usual to fall asleep. By the 3rd day, he realized he hadn't seen anyone entering or leaving room 312. No suitcases in the hallway. No heavier footsteps. No clear voices. Still, the room remained marked as occupied. At the front desk, they confirmed, with the same automatic neutrality, that every room on that floor was in use. That afternoon, while working on his laptop, he heard a dry knock on the shared wall. Not loud enough to be accidental. Just once. He waited a few seconds in silence. Nothing else happened. He went back to work, but kept the music off. Later, while showering, he heard the neighboring toilet flush at the exact moment he turned off the water. The sound was muffled, but unmistakable. The kind of coincidence that would normally go unnoticed, if not for the previous days. That night, he went out for dinner and returned after 10. The hallway was empty, as always. Passing by 312, he noticed something different. The light under the door was on, forming a thin line across the carpet. He stopped instinctively. On the other side, no sound, no television, no movement. When he entered his room, he left the door open for a few seconds, watching the corridor. He had the uncomfortable feeling that the space seemed slightly narrower than before, as if the walls were closer. Before sleeping, he pressed his ear against the wall. He didn't hear voices, just a slow, almost imperceptible breathing that stopped the moment he pulled away. He spent the night waking up several times, always with a vague certainty that he wasn't alone on that floor. The next morning, he asked to change rooms. He used a simple excuse, saying the noise at night was disrupting his sleep. The receptionist listened with polite attention, typed something into the computer, and replied that there were no rooms available at the moment. She suggested earplugs, the kind of solution repeated too often to be questioned. He accepted, but the feeling of being trapped intensified. He spent the day outside, stretching unnecessary tasks. When he returned, It was already night. The hallway seemed darker than he remembered. The lights were on, but they didn't seem to reach certain spots. As he approached his room, he noticed a sign on 312 was gone. No occupied, no cleaning, just the bare doorknob. Inside his room, he tried to distract himself with the television, low volume. In every pause between dialogues, he had the impression of hearing something from the other side of the wall, not a defined sound, the expectation of one. He went to bed early, fully awake. Sometime during the night, he heard footsteps in the hallway, slow, stopping in front of his door. There was no knock, no attempt to open it, just the uncomfortable certainty that someone was standing there for far too long. When the footsteps moved away, he realized the breathing he heard no longer came from the adjacent wall. It came from somewhere undefined inside the room. He stayed completely still, counting time by his own pulse, until exhaustion finally took over. He woke before the alarm, with a feeling that he hadn't truly slept. The room looked untouched, nothing out of place. Still, there was a different smell in the air. Not strong, but out of step with the hotel's usual chemical cleanliness. Something older, muted, in the hallway. The housekeeper pushed her cart in silence. He asked, trying to sound casual, whether the room next door had been vacated. She stopped for a moment that lasted too long. She said only that 312 wasn't part of her routine, that the room wasn't used often. She didn't elaborate. At the front desk, he pressed further, asked for details. The clerk checked the system, frowned, and said the room had been marked as unavailable for years, not under maintenance. Unavailable, as if it didn't exist for regular guests. Back on the floor, the hallway felt shorter. The door to 312 was closed, without any identification. He ran his hand along the wood. It was cold. Inside his own room, he noticed something new. Faint marks on the carpet near the shared wall. Not full footprints. Just slightly darker areas, as if someone had stood there for a long time. He packed without fully unpacking. Decided to leave earlier than planned. While waiting for the elevator, he heard a familiar sound from the wall. A subtle movement. In response, the room next door seemed to settle, as if it had noticed his decision. He left the hotel before dawn. He didn't tell anyone, just returned the key at the empty front desk and stepped into the cold street, feeling relief as the sky began to lighten. He didn't look back. Days later, already home, he noticed the silence in his apartment wasn't the same. At night, he woke too easily. Any small creak felt close. Sometimes, he thought he heard something through the bedroom wall, even though he knew the neighbor next door was away. One of those nights, he got up for a glass of water and noticed something unsettling. As he moved down the hallway, there was a slight delay, almost imperceptible, as if another step followed his own. He stopped. The sound stopped too. He lay back down, eyes open, listening to his own breathing. The room was dark, too quiet. He never returned to that hotel. Never told anyone about the experience. Still, on certain nights, when everything feels too silent, he has the sense that some nearby space remains occupied, not by anyone visible, but by something that learned his rhythm, and that sometimes still waits on the other side of the wall.